On a freezing winter day, a little girl offers her beloved scarf to a homeless man, thinking it's just a small act of kindness. But what happens next? A mysterious letter, an unexpected visit from the police, and a chain of events that changes her entire town forever. How did one scarf spark a movement of compassion? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The first snowfall of winter blanketed Chestnut Hollow in a serene white glow. This picturesque town, nestled in a valley surrounded by forested hills, had long been known for its cobblestone streets, vibrant markets, and tightly knit community. The chiming of church bells echoed through the frosty air as neighbors greeted each other warmly, their laughter visible in the cold morning mist. Amara, a 9-year-old girl with radiant, curious eyes and a heart brimming with compassion, skipped alongside her mother, Naomi, as they made their way to the town square. The icy wind tugged at Amara's braids, but she was snug in her hand-knitted scarf, a gift from her grandmother, who always said, "This scarf carries warmth beyond the wool. It's woven with love." "Mom, can we buy those cinnamon rolls today?" Amara asked, her breath puffing out in clouds as she tightened her grip on Naomi's hand. "Let's see how much we have left after the vegetables, sweetheart," Naomi replied with a soft smile. The market was alive with the chatter of townsfolk and the vibrant colors of winter produce. Stalls lined the cobbled square, their tables piled high with oranges, potatoes, and jars of honey. Amara's cheeks flushed pink from the cold as she waved to familiar faces. She loved these mornings, where the whole town seemed to come together like one big family. But as they turned down a quieter street, a shortcut to the square, the lively scene faded into stillness. Amara noticed a figure huddled beneath a bare oak tree, barely visible against the snow-covered ground. The man sat slumped, his knees pulled close to his chest, wrapped in an old torn coat. His thin frame trembled with each gust of icy wind. "Mom," Amara whispered, stopping in her tracks. Her mother followed her gaze and sighed, her expression a mix of concern and hesitation. "That poor man," Naomi murmured. She pulled Amara closer, her instincts as a mother battling with her natural compassion. "Come on, sweetheart. We should—" But Amara was already moving. She let go of Naomi's hand and approached the man, her small boots crunching against the snow. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently, her voice carrying warmth, even in the biting cold. The man looked up, his sunken eyes wide with surprise. His skin was weathered, his gray beard unkempt, and his hands red and raw from the cold. "What is it, little one?" he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. Amara knelt down, unwrapping her beloved scarf from around her neck. She held it out to him, her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from determination. "This scarf has magic," she said with a bright, earnest smile. "It will keep you warm." The man, Isaiah, stared at her, his eyes filling with tears. "I can't take that, child. It's yours." "You have to," Amara insisted, her voice firm despite her small frame. "You need it more than I do." Naomi, watching from a few steps away, felt a pang in her chest. She wanted to intervene, but something about the exchange stopped her. There was a purity in her daughter's act, a kind of courage she didn't want to stifle. Isaiah hesitated, his hands trembling as he reached out. Finally, he accepted the scarf, draping it over his shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're very kind," Amara grinned. "See? It's magic. You'll be warm now." As they walked away, Amara turned to wave at Isaiah, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. Naomi's heart swelled with pride and worry in equal measure. "That was a very kind thing you did," Naomi said softly, pulling her daughter close. Amara looked up at her mother, her face radiant. "But it was the right thing, wasn't it, Mom? You and Dad always say we should help people." Naomi sighed, smoothing her daughter's braids. "Yes, my love. It was the right thing. But sometimes helping people can be complicated." Amara frowned, confused but undeterred. She glanced back once more at Isaiah, his figure now a small speck beneath the tree. That night, as the snow fell heavier, Amara lay in bed, clutching the patchwork quilt her grandmother had made. She thought of Isaiah and wondered if he was still cold. "I hope he's warm now," she whispered into the quiet. What Amara didn't know was that her small act of kindness had set something in motion, a ripple that would soon grow beyond anything she or her family could imagine. The morning sun rose sluggishly over Chestnut Hollow, casting long, pale rays onto the snowy rooftops. Inside the Thompson household, the warmth of the kitchen was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Amara sat at the wooden breakfast table, nibbling on a slice of toast smeared with jam. Her father, Victor, stood by the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced precision, while Naomi sipped her coffee, glancing at her daughter with a thoughtful expression. "So, Amara," Victor began, his deep voice laced with curiosity, "your mom told me about what you did yesterday." Amara's eyes lit up as she put down her toast. "Dad, he was so cold. I couldn't just leave him like that. I gave him my scarf, the one Grandma made." Victor paused mid-flip, his brow furrowing. "That scarf was special to you. Are you sure you won't miss it?" Amara shook her head vehemently. "Grandma always said it was made with love. I think love is meant to be shared, right?" Naomi exchanged a glance with Victor. There was a delicate balance to parenting moments like these, nurturing Amara's kind heart while teaching her the complexities of the world. "That's true," Naomi said carefully. "But you also have to think about your safety. Talking to strangers, especially ones you don't know anything about, can be risky." Amara's face fell slightly. "But he wasn't scary, Mom. He just looked lonely." Victor leaned against the counter, his expression softening. "Amara, what you did was brave and kind, but your mom is right. Sometimes helping others means finding the safest way to do it. Promise us that next time you'll come to us first, okay?" "Okay," Amara said quietly, though the determination in her eyes remained. Later that morning, the serenity of their routine was shattered by an urgent, loud knock at the front door. The sound echoed through the house, startling everyone. Naomi put down her mug, exchanging a concerned glance with Victor. "Who could that be this early?" Victor muttered, heading toward the door. Amara peeked around the corner, curiosity etched on her face, as Victor opened the door to reveal two uniformed police officers standing on the porch. "Good morning," the older officer, a stocky man with a kind face, began. "I'm Officer Daniels, and this is my partner, Officer Hart. We're sorry to disturb you, but we need to ask your family a few questions." Naomi stepped forward, her hand instinctively going to Amara's shoulder. "What's this about?" Officer Hart, a younger woman with a calm demeanor, glanced down at a notepad. "It's about a man named Isaiah. We found him unconscious early this morning near the oak tree by Chestnut Lane." Amara gasped, her small hands flying to her mouth. "Is he okay?" The officer's expressions grew somber. "He's in critical condition," Officer Daniels said gently. "We're doing everything we can, but the cold last night was severe." Victor's brow furrowed. "What does this have to do with us?" Officer Hart looked directly at Amara, her tone soft but serious. "A witness mentioned seeing a young girl giving Isaiah a scarf yesterday. It matched the description of your daughter." Naomi's grip on Amara's shoulder tightened. "You're saying someone saw her? Are you accusing her of something?" "No, ma'am," Officer Daniels assured her. "Quite the opposite. We believe that scarf might have been the only thing keeping him alive until we found him." All eyes turned to Amara, who was trembling slightly but managed to speak up. "I gave him my scarf," she admitted, her voice small. "He looked so cold, and I thought it would help." Officer Hart knelt to Amara's level, her expression kind. "That was a very thoughtful thing to do, Amara. You might have saved his life. We just need to know if he said anything to you that could help us contact his family or learn more about him." Amara thought hard, twisting the hem of her sweater in her hands. "He didn't say much, just thank you. And he looked really sad." The officers nodded, their expressions unreadable. "Thank you, Amara," Officer Daniels said. "That was very brave of you. We'll do our best to take care of him." After the officers left, the house fell into an uneasy silence. Amara sat on the couch, staring at the floor while Victor and Naomi talked quietly in the kitchen. She felt a strange mixture of pride and worry. "Mom," she finally said, breaking the quiet, "do you think he'll be okay?" Naomi knelt beside her, brushing a stray braid from her face. "I don't know, sweetheart, but what I do know is that you gave him a fighting chance. That matters." Victor joined them, his large calloused hand resting gently on Amara's shoulder. "And no matter what happens, Amara, what you did was good. You reminded him that someone cares. That's not small. Amara nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That night, as the snow fell once again, Amara lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts were with Isaiah, and a quiet determination settled over her. If she could help one person, maybe she could help others too. The morning after the officer's visit, Chestnut Hollow was blanketed in a deafening stillness. The sun, weak and pale, barely pierced through the thick clouds hanging low over the town. Inside the Thompson household, the usual warmth of breakfast was replaced by an air of quiet unease. Victor paced near the window, his large frame tense as he glanced out at the snow-covered street. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly around a steaming mug of coffee. Amara, dressed in her favorite yellow sweater, sat in silence, staring at her untouched plate of eggs and toast. A sudden knock at the door broke the stillness, making all three of them jump. Naomi exchanged a wary glance with Victor before heading to answer it. Standing on the porch were the same two officers from the day before, their expressions more solemn than before. "Good morning," Officer Daniels began, his voice low and respectful. "May we come in?" Victor stepped aside, his jaw tightening. "Is this about Isaiah?" Officer Hart nodded, her kind eyes landing on Amara. "It is. Can we sit down for a moment?" The family gathered in the living room, Amara perched between her parents on the worn couch. The officers took the two armchairs across from them, their presence filling the cozy space with an unspoken heaviness. "I'm afraid we have some sad news," Officer Daniels began. "Isaiah passed away early this morning." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Amara's eyes filled with tears, her small hands clutching the hem of her sweater. But he had my scarf," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was supposed to help him." Officer Hart leaned forward, her tone gentle but firm. "Amara, what you did for Isaiah was extraordinary. That scarf, it may not have saved his life, but it gave him comfort in his final moments. And that's something no one else was able to do for him." Amara sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Did he say anything before he—" Officer Daniels reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He didn't say much, but he left this. It's addressed to you, Amara." The officer handed the paper to Naomi, who unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, the words scrawled with visible effort. Naomi cleared her throat and began to read aloud, her voice wavering slightly. "To the little girl with the golden heart, I don't know your name, but I will never forget you. For so many years, I've been invisible, a shadow on the streets, ignored by everyone. But yesterday, you saw me. You didn't just see a homeless man, you saw a person. Your scarf did more than warm my body, it warmed my heart. It reminded me of what kindness feels like, what it means to be human. I've carried so much pain and regret, and I've known for a while that my time was running out. But because of you, I spent my last moments feeling loved, feeling visible. Thank you for reminding me of the good that still exists in this world. Thank you for showing me that even the smallest act of kindness can make a life worth living. With gratitude and peace, Isaiah." By the time Naomi finished reading, tears streamed down her face. Victor, normally a stoic presence, wiped his eyes discreetly. Amara sat frozen, her small body racked with emotion as the words sank in. He wasn't invisible to me," she whispered. "He was just someone who needed help." Officer Hart smiled softly. "And that's what makes you special, Amara. You saw someone who needed help, and you didn't hesitate. That kind of compassion is rare, even in adults." Victor placed a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder. "Isaiah's words are proof that what you did mattered, sweetheart, more than we may ever fully understand." Naomi folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling. "Thank you for bringing this to us," she said to the officers. "It means more than you know." Officer Daniels stood, adjusting his hat. "Isaiah's story isn't over," he said. "You've given him a voice, Amara, and I think his story is going to touch a lot of lives." That night, Amara sat at her desk, staring at the folded letter on her windowsill. The world outside was quiet, the snow falling in soft flurries. She picked up a pencil and began to draw, her hands moving instinctively across the paper. When she was finished, she held up the drawing. A bench under an oak tree, with Isaiah sitting on one side and herself on the other, both wrapped in the scarf. Above them, she wrote, "A little kindness can warm the world." Amara pinned the drawing to her wall, a silent promise to keep spreading the warmth she had felt that day. The following days brought a subtle yet undeniable change to the Thompson household. Isaiah's letter remained on the kitchen table, as if it were a guest at every meal. Amara would often catch her parents staring at it, their expressions a mix of sadness and resolve. One cold evening, as the family sat together by the fire, Amara spoke up, her voice small but determined. "We need to tell people about Isaiah," she said, clutching a cup of hot chocolate. Victor looked up from his woodworking catalog, his brows furrowed. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Amara hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "He said in his letter that he felt invisible. I don't want anyone else to feel like that. Maybe if people know his story, they'll want to help." Naomi leaned forward, her eyes searching her daughter's face. "What are you thinking, Amara?" "We could tell his story at church or at the community center," Amara said. "And we could ask people to donate things for others who are cold or hungry, like Isaiah was." Victor exchanged a glance with Naomi, his expression softening. "That's a big idea, kiddo. Are you sure you're ready for something like that?" Amara nodded firmly. Isaiah's story deserves to be heard, and Grandma always said love gets bigger when you share it. The next Sunday, the family stood at the front of the small church where they attended services every week. Amara, dressed in her best Sunday dress, clutched Isaiah's letter tightly. Her heart pounded as she looked out at the familiar faces of neighbors and friends, all waiting expectantly. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Victor whispered, his hand reassuringly on her shoulder. Amara took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I want to tell you about someone I met," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "His name was Isaiah." She recounted the story of the scarf, the letter, and the way Isaiah had felt invisible. As she read aloud his words of gratitude and peace, the room fell silent, the weight of his story settling over the congregation like a blanket. When she finished, Amara looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "He said my scarf reminded him of the good in the world. I think we can all do something to remind others of that, too." There was a pause, and then the room erupted in applause. People wiped their eyes, nodding in agreement. By the following week, donations began pouring in: coats, blankets, canned food, and even handwritten notes of encouragement. The Thompsons converted their garage into a makeshift collection center, organizing the donations with the help of neighbors who had been moved by Amara's story. One afternoon, as they were sorting through boxes, a man approached the garage. He was tall and thin, with graying hair and a weathered face that mirrored Isaiah's in many ways. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rough but kind. "I heard about what you're doing here. I wanted to come and say thank you." Victor stepped forward, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. Are you a neighbor?" The man shook his head. "Not exactly. My name is Samuel. Isaiah was my brother." Amara, who had been carefully folding a donated blanket, froze. She turned slowly, her wide eyes meeting Samuel's. "You're his brother?" she asked softly. Samuel nodded, his eyes glistening. "I hadn't seen Isaiah in years. We drifted apart after some tough times. I didn't even know where he was until I read about him in the paper. And I read about you, Amara." He knelt to her level, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did for my brother, giving him that scarf, making him feel seen, it means more to me than I can ever say. Thank you." Amara felt a lump in her throat. She reached out and took Samuel's hand. "I just wanted to help," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more." Samuel shook his head. "You did more than anyone else ever did for him. And now, I want to help too. If there's anything I can do to keep his memory alive, please let me know." The next week, Samuel joined the Thompsons in their efforts, sharing stories about Isaiah's life before his struggles. He spoke of a kind-hearted teacher who had loved poetry and baseball, who had once inspired countless students. As the story spread through Chestnut Hollow, Isaiah became more than just a homeless man. He became a symbol of hope and humanity. His memory began to inspire others to see beyond the surface, to look for the stories behind the faces they passed on the street. One evening, as Amara and Naomi were organizing another batch of donations, Naomi paused and looked at her daughter. "You've started something amazing, Amara. she said, her voice filled with pride. Amara looked up, her hands still clutching a woolen scarf. It's not just me, Mom. Everyone is helping. And Isaiah's letter? It's like his way of helping too. Naomi smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Amara's face. It's true. But none of this would have happened without your heart. You saw someone who needed kindness, and you gave it freely. That's what started it all. Amara smiled softly, her thoughts drifting to Isaiah. She hoped he could somehow see what his story had inspired. Chestnut Hollow was alive with activity. The ripples of Amara's kindness continued to spread, touching every corner of the small town. Donations overflowed from the Thompson family's garage, now affectionately dubbed Isaiah's Corner by the locals. Each day brought new volunteers, from teenagers looking to make a difference to retired neighbors who finally felt that they had something meaningful to contribute. Amara stood in the middle of the organized chaos, her small hands sorting scarves into one pile and gloves into another. She had a clipboard tucked under her arm, a pencil behind her ear, and a look of quiet determination on her face. "We need more boxes for the coats," she called out, her voice steady despite the overwhelming number of items pouring in. "I'll grab some from the back," Victor replied, giving her a proud smile. Samuel approached her with a stack of blankets. "You're running this place like a pro," he said, his voice warm with admiration. Amara grinned. "Well, someone has to keep everything in order. We don't want things getting lost." Despite the flurry of activity, Amara couldn't shake a feeling that there was still more to be done. That evening, as she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and construction paper, she had an idea. The next morning at school, Amara stood nervously in front of her class, clutching a brightly colored poster she had made. It read, "Love boxes for Isaiah. Bring warmth to those in need." Her teacher, Mrs. Grayson, gave her an encouraging nod. "Go ahead, Amara. Tell everyone about your idea." Amara cleared her throat and stepped forward. "I was thinking, maybe we could all help people like Isaiah by making love boxes. They could have things like scarves, gloves, and snacks, things that would help someone stay warm and feel cared for." A hush fell over the room as her classmates considered her words. Then, one by one, hands shot up. "I can bring socks," said Lily, her freckled face lighting up. "My mom makes really good granola bars," added Jake, a boy who rarely spoke in class. "We could write notes, too," Sarah suggested, "like happy messages." Amara's smile grew wider with each new idea. By the time recess ended, the class had committed to assembling 50 love boxes by the end of the week. At home that evening, Amara shared her plans with her parents and Samuel. Naomi beamed with pride, while Victor chuckled and shook his head. "I think you're starting to give me a run for my money," Victor teased. "First the garage, now a school project. What's next, kiddo?" Amara looked thoughtful. "Maybe a place where people can go if they don't have anywhere to stay. Like a warm house with blankets and food." Victor paused, his teasing demeanor fading. He glanced at Naomi, then back at his daughter. "You mean like a shelter?" Amara nodded. "Yeah, a shelter." Samuel, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "That's a big idea, Amara, but it's a good one, and I think it's something this town needs." Naomi placed a hand on Victor's arm. "We could talk to the church and the mayor about it," she suggested. "See if we can get something started." Victor leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It won't be easy, but you're right. If there's a town that can make it happen, it's Chestnut Hollow." Within days, plans for a community shelter began to take shape. The church offered its basement as a temporary space, and local businesses donated supplies and food. Samuel, inspired by Amara's vision, volunteered to manage the shelter alongside Victor. Amara's school project also gained momentum. Her classmates worked tirelessly to fill the love boxes, decorating each one with colorful designs and heartfelt messages. On the final day of the project, the class presented the boxes at an assembly, where Amara gave a short speech. "Isaiah taught me that even a small act of kindness can make a big difference," she said, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes on her. "These love boxes are our way of spreading that kindness to others." The audience erupted into applause, and Amara felt a warmth in her chest that reminded her of the scarf she had given away. That evening, as the Thompsons prepared to deliver the love boxes to the shelter, Amara stood in the doorway of the garage, looking out at the snow-covered street. Isaiah would be happy, wouldn't he? She asked softly. Victor placed a hand on her shoulder. He'd be more than happy, Amara. He'd be proud. Amara smiled, her breath fogging in the cold air. She knew there was still so much work to be done, but for the first time, she felt hopeful that her small town could truly make a difference. Winter began to thaw, and with it came a renewed energy in Chestnut Hollow. The small community shelter in the church basement was running smoothly, providing warmth and support to those in need. Amara visited often, her small figure a familiar and comforting presence among the guests. She would help distribute blankets, serve soup, and sometimes just sit and listen to stories from those who had once been invisible to the world around them. One such afternoon, while arranging the love boxes on a shelf, Amara overheard Samuel talking to a reporter in the corner of the room. The man, dressed in a crisp suit and holding a notepad, looked out of place among the shelter's humble furnishings. "She's only 9?" the reporter asked, though his tone laced with disbelief. Samuel nodded, a proud smile spreading across his face. "Yes, sir. But don't let her age fool you. This whole movement started because of her and a single act of kindness." Amara quickly ducked out of sight, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the thought of her story being shared beyond Chestnut Hollow made her feel both nervous and excited. 2 weeks later, Amara's world changed forever. The front page of the regional newspaper featured a photo of her standing in the shelter, handing a love box to a grateful recipient. The headline read, "Small Hands, Big Heart, How One Girl Sparked a Movement of Kindness." The article recounted Isaiah's story, the impact of Amara's scarf, and the incredible outpouring of support that had followed. It described how the shelter had grown into a lifeline for many in the community, and how the love boxes had inspired similar initiatives in nearby towns. Victor read the article aloud at the breakfast table, his voice filled with pride. "It says here they want to interview you on the radio, Amara. What do you think about that?" Amara hesitated, stirring her oatmeal. "Do I have to?" Naomi placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Only if you want to, sweetheart. But remember, sharing your story might inspire even more people to help." Amara thought about Isaiah and the letter he had left her. She imagined him smiling, his scarf wrapped snugly around his shoulders. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll do it. For Isaiah." The radio interview brought even more attention to Chestnut Hollow. Donations poured in from across the state, and letters of encouragement arrived daily. One particularly heartfelt letter came from a former student of Isaiah's. The letter, written on faded stationery, read, "Dear Amara, I was a student in Mr. Isaiah's class many years ago. He was one of the kindest, most inspiring teachers I've ever had. When I heard what happened to him, I was heartbroken, but hearing your story gave me hope. You reminded me of the man he truly was, a man who cared deeply for others. Thank you for keeping his memory alive. Sincerely, Michael Rowan." Amara held the letter close, her eyes brimming with tears. She read it aloud to her parents and Samuel, her voice breaking as she finished. "He wasn't invisible to everyone," she said softly. The turning point came when a prominent philanthropist, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, reached out to the Thompsons. A wealthy businesswoman known for her charitable work, Mrs. Brooks had been deeply moved by the story and wanted to help. "Isaiah's story deserves a legacy," she said during a meeting with the family and town leaders. "I'd like to establish a foundation in his name, something that will continue to help people in need, long after we're gone." The town rallied around the idea. The foundation, named Isaiah's Warmth, was launched with a grand event held at the community center. Amara, dressed in her favorite yellow dress, stood nervously on the stage as the mayor introduced her. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor said, his voice resonating through the packed hall, "this young girl taught us all that kindness, no matter how small, can spark a movement. Amara, would you like to say a few words?" The room fell silent as Amara stepped up to the microphone. She clutched a small piece of paper in her hands, but found herself speaking from the heart instead. "Isaiah taught me that everyone has a story, even if we don't see it right away," she began. "He also taught me that kindness isn't about how much you have to give. It's about giving what you can. I hope this foundation will remind people to look for the good in others and to never stop helping." The audience erupted into applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. As Amara stepped down, she noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Michael Rowan, the former student who had written to her. He approached her after the event, holding a small, tattered book. "This was Mr. Isaiah's favorite poetry book," he said, handing it to her. "He used to read us poems when we were struggling, to remind us that even tough times don't last forever." Amara opened the book and found a handwritten note on the inside cover. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul." She looked up at Michael, her heart swelling. "Thank you. I'll keep it safe." That night, as the family returned home, Amara placed the book on her nightstand beside Isaiah's letter. She lay awake, thinking about how far their little town had come and how many lives had been touched by a single act of kindness. "I hope you can see this, Isaiah," she whispered into the quiet. "We're keeping your warmth alive." The sun rose over Chestnut Hollow, bathing the town in a golden glow. It had been 6 months since the launch of the Isaiah's Warmth Foundation, and the ripples of Amara's kindness were reaching far beyond the borders of her small town. Stories of Isaiah, the love boxes, and the community shelter had spread like wildfire, inspiring similar initiatives across the country. Amara, now a familiar name in her state, found herself at the center of a growing movement. Every week, she and her family received letters from people who had started their own kindness projects, from schools organizing donation drives to cities building shelters modeled after Chestnut Hollow's success. One morning, as Amara sat at the kitchen table with a stack of thank you cards she was carefully decorating, Victor walked in holding a letter with an official seal. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice tinged with pride and disbelief. "This one's for you, from Washington, D.C." Amara looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity. Naomi joined them, drying her hands on a dish towel as Victor handed the envelope to Amara. With careful fingers, she opened it and pulled out a letter printed on crisp, cream-colored paper. "Dear Amara, my name is Senator Margaret Whitfield, and I've been following your incredible story. Your work and the foundation you've inspired have become a beacon of hope for so many. I would like to formally invite you and your family to Washington, D.C., to speak at the National Conference on Community Compassion this fall. Your voice and perspective would be invaluable as we discuss ways to address homelessness and foster kindness nationwide." With admiration and gratitude, Senator Margaret Whitfield Naomi gasped as she read over Amara's shoulder. "Washington, D.C., she exclaimed. "That's such an incredible honor." Victor chuckled, ruffling Amara's hair. "You're becoming quite the celebrity, kiddo. Are you ready for this?" Amara hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the letter. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to talk in front of so many people," she admitted. Samuel, who had just walked in carrying a box of donated coats, set it down and crouched beside her. "You don't have to be fearless, Amara," he said gently. "You just have to be yourself. Speak from the heart, like you always do." Amara looked at the faces around her. Her parents, Samuel, and even the crayon-scrawled thank you card spread across the table. She thought about Isaiah, his letter, and the way his memory had changed not just her life, but so many others. "Okay," she said softly, her resolve strengthening. "I'll do it. For Isaiah." The weeks leading up to the conference were a whirlwind. Amara practiced her speech every evening, standing on a wooden crate in the garage while her parents and Samuel cheered her on. They helped her refine her words, ensuring they were heartfelt yet impactful. "Remember," Naomi said one night, placing a hand on Amara's shoulder, "you're not just telling your story. You're giving a voice to everyone who's ever felt invisible." When the day of the conference arrived, the Thompsons boarded a plane for the first time in their lives. Amara gazed out the window in awe as the landscape shifted beneath them, her excitement tempered by nerves. In Washington, D.C., the family was met by a staff member from Senator Whitfield's office, who guided them to the Capitol building. The grand marble halls and towering columns made Amara feel small, but she reminded herself why she was there. As they entered the conference room, she saw rows of chairs filled with policymakers, nonprofit leaders, and community advocates. At the front stood a podium adorned with the emblem of the United States Senate. "You'll do great," Victor whispered, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. When her name was called, Amara walked to the podium, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing surroundings. She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edges of the wooden stand. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "My name is Amara Thompson, and I'm here to tell you about a man named Isaiah." She recounted the story of her scarf, the letter, and the incredible journey that had followed. Her voice softened as she described Isaiah's struggles and the importance of seeing people as more than their circumstances. Kindness isn't just about what we give, she said, her voice gaining strength. It's about how we give it. It's about looking at someone and saying, "You matter." That's what Isaiah taught me, and that's what I hope we can all remember. The room was silent as her words hung in the air. Then, one by one, people began to rise from their seats, applauding with an intensity that brought tears to Amara's eyes. Senator Whitfield approached her as she stepped down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have a gift, Amara," she said warmly. "Thank you for reminding us why we're here." That evening, the Thompsons returned to their hotel room, exhausted but exhilarated. Amara lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling as the events of the day replayed in her mind. "You did it," Naomi said, sitting beside her. "You changed lives today." Amara smiled, her thoughts drifting to Isaiah's letter. "I just want people to see what I saw in him," she said softly. "Everyone deserves to be seen." The autumn air in Chestnut Hollow was crisp and fragrant, carrying the scent of falling leaves and the faint sweetness of freshly baked pies from the town bakery. The townsfolk gathered in Chestnut Park, their voices a quiet hum as they waited for the ceremony to begin. The centerpiece of the event, a simple but beautifully crafted wooden bench, was still covered by a white cloth, its unveiling eagerly anticipated. Amara stood beside her parents and Samuel, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She was dressed in her favorite yellow dress and a new scarf, hand-knitted by her grandmother, its vibrant colors mirroring the one she had given to Isaiah. She glanced at the crowd, recognizing neighbors, friends, and even a few familiar faces from the shelter. Samuel knelt beside her, his voice low and steady. "You ready, kiddo?" Amara nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I think so." Victor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're doing something incredible, Amara. This bench isn't just for Isaiah, it's for everyone he inspired." The mayor, a portly man with a warm smile, stepped up to the microphone. His voice carried through the crisp air, capturing the crowd's attention. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. "Today we come together not just to honor a man named Isaiah, but to celebrate the power of kindness, a power that has transformed our community and inspired countless others." He paused, his gaze settling on Amara. And it all started with one small act, one thoughtful girl, and one magical scarf. The crowd erupted into applause, and Amara felt her cheeks flush. The mayor gestured for her to join him at the podium. "Amara Thompson, would you do us the honor of unveiling the bench?" Her heart thudding in her chest, Amara stepped forward. She gripped the edge of the cloth and, with a deep breath, pulled it away. The crowd gasped softly as the bench was revealed. Its wooden slats gleamed in the afternoon sun, polished to perfection. A small brass plaque was affixed to the center, engraved with the words, "In memory of Isaiah," a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Tears pricked Amara's eyes as she read the words aloud. The crowd stood in hushed reverence, the weight of the moment settling over them like a warm embrace. After the ceremony, people lingered in the park, sharing stories and memories. Some approached Amara to thank her, while others sat on the bench in quiet reflection. Samuel stood nearby, speaking softly with a group of volunteers from the shelter. Amara, clutching a small bouquet of flowers, knelt by the bench and placed the blooms gently on the ground beneath it. She then draped her scarf across the backrest, a symbol of her promise to continue spreading warmth and kindness. As she stood, she noticed a young boy watching her from a distance. He looked hesitant, his hands stuffed into the pockets of an oversized coat. Amara smiled and waved him over. "Hi," she said warmly. "Do you want to sit on the bench?" The boy nodded shyly, stepping closer. "My mom said she used to know Isaiah," he murmured. Amara's smile softened. "He was a good man. I think he'd be happy to know you're here." The boy sat down, running his fingers over the smooth wood. "Do you think people will remember him?" Amara crouched beside him, her voice steady and kind. "I know they will. This bench will remind them. And every time someone sits here, they'll think about how important it is to be kind." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara walked hand in hand with her parents through the park. The bench, now a vibrant part of the community, glowed softly in the fading light, surrounded by flowers and scarves left by visitors. Naomi looked down at her daughter, her eyes shining with pride. "You've done something amazing, Amara. This bench is more than a memorial. It's a promise to keep kindness alive." Amara nodded, her heart full. "It's not just my promise, Mom. It's everyone's." As they left the park, the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky. Amara glanced upward, imagining Isaiah smiling down at her. "We did it, Isaiah," she whispered. "Your story is safe, and your kindness will keep spreading." Thank you for joining me for this story. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel to stay updated on the heartfelt stories I'm passionate about sharing. Your support means the world to me and motivates me to keep creating. I'm truly grateful to have you on this journey with me.